author of 7 books, numerous articles. She is also a poet, a published poet. Along with natural and social history, Betty is a get-your-hands-dirty archaeologist, a paleontologist, and avid conservationist. 2 of the books that she has written, she co-authored with longtime friend Charles LaBeouf. As Gail noted, familiar fixtures. She's a familiar fixture at the library. She helps us constantly. She is honored for doing that. In 2020, Captiva Island Historical Society honored her as the first recipient as the Betty Anholt Guardian of History Award. That continues. Just last year, and I'll have to refer to my notes for this, the Florida Anthropological Society presented her with a statewide award, a certificate of achievement, for her contribution to the understanding and preservation of Florida's archaeological and anthropological heritage. And to start off, and you all know this because you're all on Sanibel, there's this origin story ritual we go through. How did you come to be on Sanibel? So that's how I would like to start this off. We'll talk about the book, and then we'll talk about the more than 50 years Betty has lived here and continued to make and observe history. So, Betty, how did you come to live on Sanibel?
Well, it's a long story, but the one-word answer is accidentally.
Okay, and you want to expand on that? No. Tell us when and who and where. Okay.
Well, we got here in 1969. We actually moved to Fort Myers the year before. My husband worked for the Water Company in New Jersey, and he thought he was going to be working for the Water Company in Fort Myers, which did not happen. So he was working instead for a place called Prather's Laundry, their commercial truck route, which included Sanibel, which included everything from down to Naples, to the hospital, which was all the way into downtown Naples, up to Boca Grande, out to Alva, Fort Myers Beach, Bonita Beach, all in a single week, if you can imagine. It was a different world, obviously, at that point. But in the evenings, he was working at a station about a block from our house, a gas station, out part-time. We had 2 little babies, double 9 yards. And the man who was managing it had worked over here on Sanibel for Francis Bailey at the service station at the corner near the causeway. So Francis was bugging, this guy's name was Max Sellers, and Francis was bugging Max to come back. And Max didn't want to come back on his own. He was near retirement age. So eventually he talked Jimmy into kind of going halves on a partnership, which is how we got here. I met Max for the first time when they proposed this to me. It was totally a risk. But then here we are.
Okay, and you came with 2 little kids. Could you describe, well, I'll tell you, the gas station, we all know, derelict now, I'm sure it was a going concern back in the day. Also in that neighborhood was the bait box, Elsie Malone's specimen shells, the Sanibel trolley, and...
Not the trolley.
No, I'm sorry, not that, this is later. Okay, that's my other question. So anyway, in that neighborhood, she was working, and you worked at which of those businesses I just mentioned?
I worked at Elsie Malone's. Of course, I worked at the station, most of the time at home, paperwork type of things. But obviously, at that point in time, there was no bank on the island. There was certainly no place to get automotive parts. So I was constantly running to town with the kids in the back seat, picking up parts for Jim and going to the bank or wherever else in Fort Myers. So I was kind of a back room person working at the station.
Okay. And Elsie Malone's specimen shells, where are those today?
Some of them, just a few of them, of Elsie's mother's collection. There were two Elsies, Elsie A and Elsie M. And Elsie M was running the business at the time I started working for them. Mama had retired, and that is her collection. That is at the Sanibel Library in our lobby, parts of it. Okay. We lost a lot of it during Ian.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
too bad. I did not know that. I asked Betty to share an anecdote that I call Tourist at the Till, that will give you an idea in the early days, in the early 70s, and then on, what the feel of the island was like. So can you tell them the little anecdote about the Tourist at the Till?
Yeah, we lived in a little house behind the station. And by little, I mean very little. It was 20 feet wide and 24 feet long, 480 square feet for 4 people. So we are talking about tiny. Jim Waller home, if anybody remembers those. Anyway, I would run back and forth to the station frequently. I'd have things or answer the phone. We had a second phone at the house in case they were out pumping gas or something and couldn't catch the phone. So I walked up to the station this one time, and there was this guy putting money in the till. And I had never seen him before in my life. And I looked around, and there was no Jim, there was no Max, there was no Joe Tucker, which was our also almost all the time employee. And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm Dick Downs." He said, "I pulled in and nobody was here, so guy pulled in and needed some gas, so I pumped it for him. I'm just giving him his change." Okay, Dick Downs later became our interim city lawyer and spent quite a bit of volunteer time at the city with land planning and that sort of thing. But he became a very good friend. But that was my introduction to him. And I might mention also that his wife, Jean Downs, was very important here in the museum as well. She spent a lot of time working here as a volunteer, as well as writing some articles for the Islander Reporter.
Okay, so a very different world. So when, just like Glenn Rhodes, who was in the Bailey store often when the volunteer fire, what was that, the fire bar telephone?
I'm sorry, I didn't say why the place was empty, but yeah, we had what was called the fire bar in the station. That was for all of the volunteer firemen. The bar would go off, and the dispatcher would tell them where an emergency had occurred, whether it was a car crash or a fire or something of that sort. And the volunteers that could go would go. And this was, I do not remember what the exact problem was for this one. We did have several plane crashes, and it may well have been one of those because everybody at the station just took off madly down the road and left everything open.
So, very different world.
Yeah.
Okay, we will chat more with Betty about her personal remembrances, but first, how did this book, Sanibel's Story, how did this book come into being, Betty?
Well, I guess officially you would say through the Historical Preservation Committee. That was their idea, but really it was Jody Brown who championed the idea. Jody and I had both done a lot of oral histories. We transcribed a number of oral histories from Ellie's day, Ellie Dormer's day, that had never gotten transcribed from the cassettes she had done for when she put together her book. And those cassettes were deteriorating. They needed to be either dealt with or, they would be gone. So we had spent a lot of time with that. We had spent a lot of time with the various photos and exhibits over here in the Rutland House, because that was all we had at that time, of course, was just the Rutland place. There were all sorts of things scattered about, but they needed to be consolidated. And the 25th anniversary of the city was coming up. So, those ideas all came together, and that's why the book began and why the Historical Preservation Committee went to the city. Of course, that was set up differently at that time. They went to the city and proposed this, and it was approved.
Okay, so the city contracted with you. She says this very modestly. Prior to this, another business that Betty and Jim Anholt founded, and I wish I had been around to ride on the Sanibel trolley, which went as far afield with sightseeing as Miami. But prior to this coffee table book, you had written the Sanibel Trolley Guide. So what were your thoughts as you went into this contract with the city to produce the history of the island?
Well, once I was chosen to do it, yes, I was nervous, but I was also eager because I just really felt that so much of this history would slip away if it wasn't put together in a form where it would be available.
So you were eager and you dug in. And
Yeah.
Okay. And if I'm going to try to save time, I would love to know about her process. I like to talk to others about things like that. This book, and many of you have it, and many of you have probably read most or all of it, it's divided into 7 chapters chronologically. And interestingly, I just realized it's divided pretty much by either natural or man-made disasters. And those are what have shaped the island. It's pretty brilliant, really. But before the lighthouse, early years in homesteading, and that's 1884 to 94. Great Expectations, 1911 to 1928. So that would be right after the 26th hurricane. The Depression and War, 1924 to 1945, Growing Again, 1946 to 1959, and then the final chapter, Confrontation and Conservation, 1960 to about 1998. And we will talk about each of these chapters briefly today, and I've asked Betty to tantalize us with some historical tidbits. In chapter 1, Before the Lighthouse, pre-1884, in just 10 pages, rich with photos and illustrations, you talk about the geological formation, the relationship between Clues and Spanish explorers, how we got our name, and then you also summarize Florida's history, including English, Spanish, and American colonization. Wow, it's amazing. So from chapter 1, 10 pages that span many rich years, what would be a historical tidbit you would like to share with this audience?
Well, one of the areas that I am fascinated by is that early settlement on Sanibel, the 1833 settlement. I'm a little sad that the map has disappeared here.
Oh, it's in the corner.
Oh, good.
So,
Okay. Well, maybe I'll look at that in a little bit.
Actually,
I don't need to look at it right now. It's fine. But that settlement was right at the basic, 12 years, something like that, after the territory of Florida actually became American. The Spanish had owned and still has owned Florida longer than the Americans have, as far as its history. And the concept that a group of people had come here and incorporated Sanibel back in 1833, as well as one other town being incorporated on this island, the town of Murray, up on basically about Wolford, is just amazing. And they lasted for a couple of years until the Second Seminole War. One of the men involved with that, Benjamin Strobel, was very interesting to me, and he was a writer. He put down his impressions and the story of the first landing, if you will, on the island, which I found extremely valuable and interesting as well.
Okay, I gave her a lot to choose different things, but that first 10 pages, it's remarkable what's included. We move then to chapter 2, the early years in homesteading. I think that's the period I especially like, 1884 to 1894. I have those dates wrong because it's 16 pages, so I have a typo there. Once the lighthouse was built in 1884, the island opened to homesteading in 1888, and then things started happening. The second chapter, and throughout the book, she has quotations from early settlers or peoples, and they're just pithy little things that dot the pages. Flora Woodring Morris, the first white child born on Sanibel to the Woodring Homestead family, said in an interview, "I must say, we didn't get over to the Gulf side very much. You couldn't get there. It was too desolate, you know." And so, anyway, lots of juicy historical tidbits in that second chapter. Betty, which of the ones I threw out there, did you pick your own, or which one are you going to share?
I picked one you mentioned for this, and that's where I'm going to want the map. So I wanted to talk about Sam Ellis. I almost said Sam Woodring.
It's a little rickety.
Okay. I think it'll be fine. Anyway, Sam Ellis lived on the south side of Tarpon Bay being right here. He lived along this area through here. And when you look at the map, you see that this arm that encloses Tarpon Bay is solid. But if you know anything about Tarpon Bay today and look at it, you know that there is an opening right about here. And so that's what I want to talk about. Anybody know what the name of that opening is? I'm looking at Deb.
Looking at my phone.
No. Anyway, it's called the Shallow Cutoff. And further down the way, you know, in Ding Darling, there's the Shallow Mouth. That's one of the openings like McIntyre Creek and some of the others. But the Shallow Cutoff was obviously not always there. Sam Ellis has always been known as a very lazy, retired English, I think, soldier. May have been Navy, I'm not sure which, but he had a little boat and he had a jug of liquor and he would float around in Tarpon Bay. That's kind of his story. But it's not entirely true because Sam Ellis dug the Shallow Cutoff. And the reason he did that is because our post office did not exist at the time. So all of our mail was dropped off at St. James City. There was also a store at St. James City. But to get there from the Ellis homestead, he had to go way over to Woodring Point and then way back and up to St. James City. So he made the Shallow Cutoff, and he had a straight shot to the store and post office. For which George Cooper, who mostly brought in the mail and left it at his home on his wife's sewing machine, so they say, was much easier to move around through Tarpon Bay. So Sam is considered a lazy guy, but maybe he's just an efficient guy, not a lazy guy.
When you look at the old Over Easy property, and you know where the restaurant is, the gift shop connected to it, it's a two-story old-looking building, that is Captain Cooper's, and it's his original homestead house, correct?
Yes, I believe 1895. That sounds right.
Okay, and so, chapter 3, Great Expectations. The turn of the century is richly depicted here, 1895 to 1910. And you note in the book that, and I'm getting feedback from somewhere, the book that Sanibel's population in those 15 years roughly tripled from about 120 to maybe over 300 if you count up at the far end and moving on towards Captiva. Okay. From the beginning, this is the sort of thing that she has in the beginning of this chapter. 40 acres, new things taken from newspapers. 40 acres of splendid vegetable land on Sanibel, near Steamboat Landing, daily steamers, good location, a splendid bargain at $15 per acre. Suitable for early vegetables of all kinds. Sanibel was obviously a very different place. Betty, do you have a tidbit from that turn of the century time?
Not one of yours.
Not one of my, I gave you, I said you knew other things, so good, I'll be
No,
surprised.
I think from that era, the thing that just makes me smile all the time is the story of actually the 1910 hurricane and Elise Fuller and their mule, Mamie. They went through the storm. They watched dolphins swim around the house. This house was a farmhouse owned by her grandfather, and it was near the end of Donnox or Tulipa Way. After the storm, the mule, which had been in the barn, which collapsed around it, through this entire time was hooked up to a cart and brought to the house, which no longer had its porches, but it was brought to the back door. And the kids and the parents clambered onto the cart, and they made their way up to the lighthouse. But by doing so, from Donnox up to the lighthouse, they had to cross the area where the Sanibel Slough or Sanibel River was gushing out, emptying from the excess of rainfall. And so the mule was being forced out into the Gulf onto a sandbar to get around this flow of water. And then back onto shore and to the lighthouse. And I just feel so sorry for that mule. I just love that mule, Mamie. I think that's so terrific. And, you know, considering what mules basically are, that's just an incredible feat.
Okay, we may need to give some thought to naming our mule out there in the courtyard, Mamie. I think that would be a lovely thing to do. Well, she mentioned the 1910 hurricane. You know, it destroyed the Church of the Four Gospels, where Sanibel is now. And I just recently read that the 1910 hurricane was a wet storm. And so it might have been in your book that I read that. And so that washed the soil pretty quickly. So they were able to get back to agriculture, and that continued. Betty, I have a question about the book. You page through it, there are so many anecdotes, there are so many quotations. As you researched this, what sources did you use to find so much wonderful personal history from people?
Well, that was the great joy of the oral histories and transcribing them. The transcription in the 90s was a machine that you operated with a foot pedal, and you typed what you heard, and then you ran it backwards, and you listened to it again and realized you hadn't quite typed it right. And you did this several times for every sentence. And it imprints in your brain. And listening to the voices of these various people, whether it was Uncle Clarence or Uncle Art, or whether it was John Purefoy, or some of the many, many others that I interviewed, as well as the ones that Ellie had interviewed that never got transcribed. It was just a joyous thing. And I needed to share their point of view, not just my point of view.
So you had all these voices in your head from hours
Absolutely.
and hours of plug and chug
Yeah.
transcription. And
Question,
yes,
do any of those transcriptions still exist? I mean,
Absolutely. They are in the physical ones, the ones that have actually been transcribed where the cassettes could be understood, are physically at the library. They are also online at the library. They've been scanned, and you can read them in the comfort of your own home on your computer. And that is thanks to Beth over there in the corner. And
yeah. Yeah, yes.
I have a question about the Black history. Has anyone transcribed the voices of those families?
I can think of at least two of the transcripts that were done by yes,
Okay.
Oscar Gavin and I'm forgetting his
Was it
first name. I
Kenneth?
think it's Isaac Johnson.
Isaac. Okay. And question about the Black history and transcriptions. On our website, we have a couple of interviews, video interviews, and you can watch those. And as Betty said, the library online site, if you go to the library and you scroll down on the homepage, and there's a picture of the lighthouse, an old picture of the lighthouse. Click on that, it will open a whole world. You can read these transcripts, and they are just...
Yeah, those resources, there's a number of papers, there's newspapers, there's the transcripts, there are newspapers from the 1930s, and there are thousands of pictures. So
Betty, how would you characterize 1911 to 1928 on Sanibel? How would you call it sun and storms, but what was it like on the island then, do you think?
well, I think it was kind of happy, prosperous, and certainly free-spirited. When I think of that era, I think about the Cuban smacks. That was certainly going on, the fishing smacks, and they were coming into the Bailey Dock. The people that were basically in their 20s were gathering together, and they organized with the sailors from the fishing smacks. They went out on picnics. Other thing I think about is Ernest Bailey sunbathing out on the dock. Au natural, yes. But the other thing I think about is the Ocean Leather Company, which was started, it didn't last very long, but what they were doing was catching sharks, whales, manta rays, most anything of that large variety, and taking the skins, turning them into ocean leather. They were also, as far as the sharks, taking the livers of the sharks and using the oil from the liver in various commercial, processing. And that was set up near where the Sanibel Marina is today. So
Environmentally, it was a time when...
they ran out of sharks rather quickly, basically.
Yes. And then, again, after the 1926 hurricane, you titled the fifth chapter, Depression and War. What was the population of the island? And it was a much smaller community from 1929 to 1945. What was it like on Sanibel?
Yeah, obviously the resident population dropped dramatically. People left because there was no farming. There was not much of anything that they could do other than perhaps a certain amount of commercial fishing, although that was quite difficult because the other piece of the population was some soldiers that were billeted here on the island and were patrolling the beaches. So you had the interaction between basically the government, the army, and commercial fishing, which sometimes ran into difficulties. One fisherman got caught up. He was wearing one of those headlight lamps and casting up at the Blind Pass area, and was caught up with the patrol, and not knowing any better, he was just kind of, oh, hi, interacting type of thing. Oh, can I see your rifle, and reach for it, and almost got himself killed, thank you. The other thing that was going on here was that much of the north or west end of Sanibel was used as a bombing range for a practice target. And from Buckingham Field, the flyers would be coming out into the Gulf and then turning and running over the island and shooting bullets at various targets up there as they went through. So that didn't really provide you with much land to maneuver around.
Yeah, that, quiet times and population, you would say, was 100 or less pretty much during those years. Okay. The next chapter, growing again, the post-war boom. Well, I think we'll skip that. You can read that chapter. Sanibel was booming, growing again. Then we come to the period of time, confrontation and conservation, 1960 to the mid-1990s, when the Sanibel all of us live in came to be. And Betty, you lived on Sanibel during that formative time. Just as a for example, when did you learn? Because I'm assuming a lot of the folks in this audience, I know many of you, and are familiar with the basics of the Sanibel plan. When did you learn, for example, that your friend Charles LaBeouf was considering a run for the first city council? There's pictures right over there.
We actually, he had a sailboat. The family had 2 sailboats, actually, and we would occasionally go out, groups. And one of the times we were out sailing, we were in San Carlos Bay, and really just either drifting or anchored, I forget which. We weren't moving anyway. And he brought the subject up and said, what do you think? We talked it all over, and that's when we first realized he was giving it some serious thought. He had some problems with that simply because he was a federal employee, because he was working at the refuge. And being a federal employee meant that you could not run for office as a Democrat or a Republican, but since this was set up as a nonpartisan race, there was that ability to do that, but he would have to, take the time off, use his vacation time for the council business. And so there were a lot of hoops for him to jump through in order to do that. And he was, for 6 years, a councilman, and he was
One of the revered members of that original city council. What else?
One of 2 that still remain with us today, he and Porter.
He and Porter are the only 2. Yeah, well, after the program, you can look at the photo in the corner. We have the Sanibel and its planned exhibit up on the walls over there. What else do you remember about that remarkable formation of the city of Sanibel?
Well, it was certainly a very active year. I mean, everybody was talking to everybody and trying to decide, You know, we had what was basically, I guess I don't really want to use the word corrupt, but then again, I really kind of do. Lee County government in many ways, and they certainly had it out for us as islanders. And that would be very difficult to stay with them. On the other hand, it was yet another layer of government, and was that going to be even worse? And the argument went back and forth and back and forth, pro and anti, and there was a lot of hesitation, and there was a lot of discussion, but it went in a very really conversational way. There weren't really any terrible conflicts, but everybody was involved. Everybody was talking. It was passionate.
Discourse.
Yes, yes, it definitely was.
As a follow-up to that, just your opinion, because you're a historian, you look at things. If the remarkable group of citizens on this island had not secured home rule, and that was no easy feat, if they had not contracted for the Sanibel plan, what do you think this place might look like today?
Well, I think everybody was looking at, you know, the various other South Florida, whether it was East Coast or even Fort Myers Beach, and saying, do we want to do that? Do we want to lose all of our, you know, this island, even back as far as 1900, was very, very cognizant of their conservation values, of the birds, of the animals here, and they wanted to protect them. That wasn't anything new that just popped up. And I think that's what turned that tide more than anything. Knowing that, you know, as much development as the county wanted to push on us would mean total destruction of that.
And you talk about development. In the book, she has a number of photographs, aerial photographs in particular, of the island of Sanibel. And this is so hard for me to wrap my head around. Could you describe, Betty, in the early days, say, you know, at turn of the century, or when people came out here, or even in the 30s or 40s, if you were on the island, what would it look like? Not Garden of Eden.
No, not Garden of Eden, and not landscaped. Yes, farming, but basically this island, thanks in large part to many of our hurricanes, has always been a prairie, has always been low vegetation. I know the Bailey family used to talk about sitting at their house and watching sailboats in the Gulf of Mexico. Alan Nave, who was living up near the end of the Ding Darling Refuge, also talked about being able to see things in the Gulf across the width of the island. And that's just the way it was. It was grass, it was some sable palms, it was mangroves. But as far as tall vegetation, as far as a lot of other vegetation until, and again, this was the Bailey family planting some Australian pines back in the 20s for windbreaks for the farmers. We really didn't have anything tall on this island other than the lake itself.
Okay. You have been given an insider's view and a quick trip through the modern history of Sanibel. I have a couple of other questions, Betty, and this I really want to get to. And Betty, so we could do this, not a lightning round, but I'm interested in creative process. And so, and you've looked at these questions. So you can just give me simple answers. For example, where did you write the book? Where were you physically?
Physically at my house. I've got an office spare bedroom type of thing,
Okay.
and that's where.
Longhand or keyboard?
Both.
And when do you write? Or,
After the dishes got done,
okay. How would you describe your discipline as a writer? I think the dishes question answered that.
well, when I sit down, it's usually because I have a couple of hours anyway, and I work
How do
pretty
you,
steadily, but it's not a matter of every 8 a.m. to 9
Right.
p.m. Yeah.
okay. How do you handle the revision editing process? Or is your first draft so good you don't have a lot of that?
Ha ha.
Okay,
Yeah. No, go over it many a time.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What's something you wish you had known before you started writing the book?
I don't know exactly, but I can say that I've learned a lot since I wrote the book. So there's a lot that could have gone in there that didn't quite get in there. But
Are there any follow-ups, a subsequent from 1999 to 2025?
well, there are some other books.
There are other books. There are other books. And,
So-
and I would recommend Once Upon the Island Known as Sanibel, which she co-wrote with Charles LaBeouf. That's fun to read. It's just fun. If you could go back, I have one last question and then or two questions. If you could go back in time and visit one of the earlier periods of Sanibel, your personal safety is guaranteed. What time period would you choose?
I think I'd go back to this 1833. Basically, I would go back to Benjamin Strobel, the man I mentioned. He was a medical doctor and a writer, but he walked through most all of the island, describing it, and I'd love to be, seeing that with his eyes. But the other possibilities would be the man who actually drew this map, Edward Armstrong, and just ride along in the boat with him as he did his job there as a surveyor, because it's really quite an excellent map considering the time and place and what he had to go through to do it. Yeah.
Okay, last question about Sanibel's story. Why should people who visit and live on Sanibel read this book?
What did I think about? Let me look.
So yeah, I gave her a lot to think about. I know my own answer, and that's because if you love a place, you need to know the story. Do you have?
Yeah, really, it's wanting to show the story, wanting people to understand the long story, the unique story that these islands have had, and to appreciate it.
Will you join me in thanking our guest for today?
And if you have any questions, she gets upset if I call her an oracle or venerable, but she is. So,
Okay, my question is, as a docent, budding docent, and someone who's been covering here,
okay, the question is, how, as Sanibel residents, how should we respond to the proposed development, overdevelopment of Captiva South Seas?
And I think that the city has been responded, certainly has supported the Captiva Civic Association in arguing for, holding its own as rather than increasing the number of development units up there, the rest of that. There really isn't anything other than that they're able to do. It's a state road. They can't close it down, you know.
And it goes back to the incorporation and non-incorporation.
Yes, you're quite right. There was, when Sanibel incorporated, they asked Captiva if they wanted to join us, whether they wanted to be both islands. And with a straw vote, they decided that basically that they would be the tail on the dog that would wag, just like Sanibel was the tail on the dog wagging for the county, and that they would probably be better off standing aside.
How was SCCF, their efforts working towards that?
Well, SCCF is basically not, well, it is political in many ways, but it's basically a natural resources
I
rather.
just heard that they seem to be, sportively donate.
They were involved,
Yeah,
yes.
they are, okay.
And, you know,
Okay.
you'd have to talk with Jim Evans.
Okay, we have another question back here.
Well, a thought, the Captiva, they've been fighting tooth and nail, and it's problematic if they're going to win in the long run. I've often thought myself as a backup, Captiva could become first Sanibel.
Yeah, does that,
And I don't know whether that is possible, whether we could annex them, and I just don't know about the politics, so I'm not going to try to.
floating around?
Right, yes. Yeah.
I think their erosion that's frightening.
Now, that is, again, another reason why it was hesitant. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions before we let her sign any books if you have those in the like that? Yeah.
As a historian, how would you write up current times?
Question was, as a historian, how would you write up current times? I assume you mean on the island.
Yes.
Well, the thing about historians is they concentrate on various eras, and that's not my era. I have grown up in it, but really I haven't sat in the city council meeting after meeting, that sort of thing. I wouldn't feel as competent doing today's as I do back in the earlier times.
Okay. Please join me in one more thank you to you.